Hello and welcome to episode 92 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark. Now joining me on today's episode is the film director Keith Thomas. I believe this film director has a huge future ahead of him. He's only just released a film which I'm sure you've heard of. In the horror community, people are going crazy for it, The Vigil. It's had the backing of Blumhouse, and most recently he's just signed on to do the new adaptation of Stephen King's Firestarter. I really am absolutely thrilled that Keith's joining me today, and it's one of my favourite interviews I've done in a very long time. We hit off straight away, the chemistry's there, and we could talk for hours, so I can't wait to share this with you, but you're going to have to stick around just a little bit longer to hear that. On the last episode, I was joined by Jed Shepherd, the writer of a horror that's gone absolutely through the roof over the last couple of weeks. Everyone is talking about Host, which has been on Shudder. This is a film that's just getting bigger and bigger. As I'm sitting here today, it's just been on the news. All the film critics are talking about it, and I think I just got him in time because his world is going to go bigger and bigger. And I also believe that about today's guest, Keith Thomas. So what I want to do now is get straight to that interview with me and Keith. So here it is. Here's me and Keith talking all things horror. First of all, Keith, I'd like to thank you for joining me today on the Mark and Me podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
What I want to do is start by anyone that's listening that doesn't know of your work or anything. I want to take it back right to the start. So when you were growing up, what were your kind of favourite films or genre or those movies that you were watching that shaped the kind of taste you have now in film?
Yeah, I grew up, very much into films like Alien and Aliens and Predator and a lot of sci-fi horror. I think it was as a kid I liked sci-fi quite a bit and read a lot, and then that slowly gravitated, moved its way into horror. So I grew up watching a lot of horror movies, having sleepovers with friends where we'd go to the rental store and check out 4 or 5 movies and stay up till 6 a.m. and just try to freak each other out with these movies. And then that, as I got older, that switched more into art, what they call art house, film. So a lot of European movies. And then in college, I actually studied European film as like a minor.
Yeah.
Then it just, when it came time for me to start considering making films, it was a merging of those two in a way, of my kind of love for horror and also my appreciation and kind of studying of European film, in particular Italian and German.
Were there kind of early directors when you're watching stuff like Alien and Aliens and seeing like Ridley Scott and people like this? Was there a certain director that you were wanting to kind of find out more about them and scope out more of their work because they impressed you, or were you just watching it for the films that they were at the time?
Yeah, I think definitely Ridley Scott. Once I'd seen Alien and then Blade Runner, I saw them on videotape, long after they'd come out. But I really kind of was searching for all his stuff and kind of tracking it down. And then, reading interviews and trying to find information. So he was one who was this very visual, stylistic director who is super commercial, which is interesting. And he's, and then, James Cameron is a similar one who's, had nothing but hits. And he at the same time does his own thing in a more commercial way than Ridley, I think. But, so stuff like that. And David Fincher was another one. So, those directors.
Great influences there to go with. That's not bad when you
definitely, the Trinity in a way. But, there's another director, Jean-Jacques Benix, who I mispronounce his name, of course, but he directed a movie called Betty Blue, which I'd seen, I think, in high school, and I was just struck by it. I actually wrote him a letter. I somehow found his address and wrote him a letter. He wrote back, which was very sweet, but it was kind of one of those first moments. That was, I think, my first communication with a filmmaker.
Nice.
And, he was very encouraging. It was great.
So at what point was it that you thought, instead of just learning about it and wanting to do it, it became a reality where you thought, I could actually try and do this myself? Because obviously getting involved in film, some people will do writing of scripts or do some cinematography work or some editing. But when was it you thought, I'm actually going to want to focus my life on becoming a director?
Yeah, it's funny because I had that thought in high school. That's kind of what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then I took a 20-year pause where I went into a completely different career. When I was in high school, I wanted to be in film, but I I was under the assumption that you had to have connections or know somebody in Hollywood, or there was just no way to truly do it. And so I gave up, and I went into, I had a career in clinical research in medicine, and I did that, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. But kind of there was always that creative thing at the back of my head. Kind of it first manifest in kind of in writing short stories and poetry and publishing, and then it became longer and longer works to novels and then screenplays. And so once I started writing, it was about a 10-year journey of writing screenplays that were rejected, and then finally getting a manager, and then finally selling screenplays. And then about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I quit my day job and was fully committed to doing this. And I did a short film in 2017. I studied film in college, but it was, academic. It was
Yeah.
me, looking at Tarkovsky movies and stuff, but I didn't know how to make a film. I had no idea. So I convinced my wife to let me use some of our savings. And I did this kind of 3-month boot camp of, I'm going to write, direct, produce, and do whatever it takes. And I made this short film. And by that time, I'd had enough kind of connections in Hollywood through screenwriting that I was able to send it to people. And that essentially led to The Vigil.
So how did the conversation go when you're in a full-time secure role, bringing in money, and then turning around to the wife and saying, I want to stop doing all this and I want to follow my dream? Was it a kind of an easy decision, or was it a lot of convincing and kind of,
It was funny. The convincing part came from my wife.
wow.
Yeah, she had always been really, really encouraging of me to explore my creative side as much as possible. And so she had, I had threatened to quit my job and just write full time or to pursue filmmaking. And she was always like, you got to do it. You should do it. And I'd be like, I'd say, no, I can't. It's too risky.
Yeah.
Who makes it? No one can make it. It's too difficult. Like, how do you do that? So yeah, it was her cajoling, and eventually got to the point where I was like, I think I need to do this. And she said, I'm here. Let's do it. Let's go for it. And then I said, well, I want to take a bunch of money and make a short film. And we're never going to make that money back. It's a short film. It's just, this is a proof of concept of that I can direct something, and I might fail miserably. And she was willing to take the risk and kind of encouraged it.
So was this 3 years ago when you released Arcane? Is that right?
Yeah, it was Arcane.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that come about? Because obviously you got the money yourself, so you self-funded it. Did you at that stage realize how much work was involved? Had you bit off more than you could chew, or was it a great learning experience to set you up for the sort of roles you're now doing?
Yeah, no, it was a great learning experience. It was a 2-day shoot. We had a couple months of prep, but everything that could go wrong in 2 days did on that shoot. In that, my director of photography, his wife went into labor the night after the day after our first shooting.
Wow.
So he couldn't be there the next day. And I had to scramble and find a DP to fill in with 3 hours notice in Denver, Colorado, where there are very few DPs. He's one of the best DPs in Denver. So that was insane. One of the crew members had kidney stones and had to go to the ER. That was also the first night. It rained when it wasn't supposed to rain, and just everything was crazy. And yet I was still able to accomplish what I wanted and kind of make the film that I had been envisioning.
Yeah.
And so it was a great learning experience in that I kind of learned the ropes in terms of how the set functions and how we do what we need to do. And then also just problem solving. I mean, that it becomes, that's essential to any filmmaking endeavor, because you can plan for everything, but something's going to go wrong. Something's going to go wrong every single day you shoot. And it's all about figuring that out, no matter the budget.
So how do you go then from doing a short film for kind of your first chance to kind of put your name onto something as a director, to then coming into doing The Vigil this year, which is obviously a huge budget and with a number of stars involved? The jump is absolutely massive, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it was, it was a long process in a lot of ways, because once Arcane had kind of done its thing, and kind of gotten around, and I'd signed with a manager who was very receptive to kind of the ideas that I'd had. I had developed Arcane, the short film, has been developed into a film script. That is a project that is actually set up with a production company now, and it's something that I've been trying to get off the ground for a while. And it was in the course of trying to get that off the ground that I decided to write The Vigil. And it was an interesting situation, because I'd written the script, and there was interest in buying it, but without letting me direct it. So
Right.
it was kind of one of those where I had to turn down money to just buy me out, essentially, buy the script, insisting that I was going to direct it. So, that led its own course. But when I met the producers on The Vigil, they were, once I'd convinced them that I could do this, it was something that they were like, okay, we're gonna go for it. So amazingly, The Vigil, I wrote the script, and we were in production shooting it 8 months later, which is highly unusual for these sorts of things. The film that I'm prepping now, Firestarter, which is at Universal and Blumhouse, it's been technically that it's a film that they've been trying to get together for years. And these studio movies are much more difficult to kind of get off the ground than an independent like The Vigil. But I was lucky. 8 months is a short time.
So talk to me about The Vigil. How much involvement did you have with stuff like the casting and everything else? 'Cause obviously, I know you had written it, had the directing, but what was it else was there bits where you just had to hand some of the reins over because it was so much of a big project?
Yeah, it was, I was very involved really on almost every level. Casting was very important. It was tough casting. And Dave Davis, who's the lead in The Vigil, was somebody that I had come across in a film and kind of really promoted, and was able to get my producers interested in. But casting, set decoration, location scouting, just really hands-on in a lot of it. And it's interesting because in pre-production you can be very, very hands-on in terms of like, I'm going to be in every meeting, and I'm going to
Yeah.
be sitting here. And then of course, once you start shooting, things are much more intense, and you do have to delegate. And it's something that I think most directors have to come to terms with. You want to ensure your vision, but at the same time, you cannot do everything, and no one wants a director who's micromanaging everything on set. You have to be willing to say, okay, you're going to do this, and I'm going to let you do that. And that's fine. I know what I want, and I think what we want to do together. And so I'm going to let you go. And it takes a little while to get into that groove, because every set is different and everyone's trying to figure it out. But yeah, I mean, that was definitely a big part of it, of learning to delegate, learning to kind of let go in some
Yeah.
instances.
And with it being such a short space of time from when it actually then went into post-production and stuff,
Mm.
did you feel it was quite realistic timeframes, or was it too much? Were you getting kind of suffocated in it at a point where, because you said like everything could go wrong with your first film, Arcane, but with this,
Right.
was there a lot more chance to, like you said, delegate, or did you still feel at times that it was just an absolute huge project to do in such a short space of time?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely days you walk in and you're like, this is just a shit show, and I have no idea, what how this is going to come together. Um, and then amazingly, it does. I think it's just relying on other people and just kind of figuring it out, and then trusting. You just come to trust people and know, okay, yeah, we all have the best interests in mind, and we know where we're going with this. It was funny. We in The Vigil, there aren't any left out scenes. There are no cut scenes.
No.
Everything that we shot is in that movie, um, which was actually nerve wracking, because when we finished and we started the edit, I was worried, because I was like, oh no, what if we're, what if we're missing something? What if there's something we need to tweak here or there? But the edit came together really, really quickly. We had our first cut of the film within weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, which was shocking, but also and worrisome in a lot of ways. But it was kind of one of those things of we had committed ourselves to this idea when we started it, that we were going to shoot only what we need, and we were going to and this is it. We're making the movie in production, and we'll edit it, and well, let's just see what happens. The longest piece was the post-production sound
Yeah.
design and score. That took quite a long time, but just being very particular and kind of really wanting to develop the sound as much as we could, and we kind of had time, so that was nice.
And now it's all done and you can watch it back. Are you in a place where you're really proud of it, or is there things that kind of get to you where you think, I wish I could change this, or are you really, really kind of in a good place with it?
Yeah, I've seen it how many hundred times at this point, from when we watch it doing the sound mixing in a theater. So I'd seen it, countless times that way. And every time I'd watch it, with a critical eye when I'm kind of listening to certain sounds. Or it's interesting when you're in the edit or when you're doing sound design or, the score, you're watching the movie in tiny chunks. You're watching a minute at a time, and then you're reversing and watching a minute and reversing and watching a minute. So it's hard to get a cohesive sense of the whole film.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to have a screening. And I was critical of it every single time I'd seen it up until we had our premiere at Toronto. And then I just kind of had to sit on my hands and watch it with the audience. And I couldn't yell, "Hey, stop, I need to fix something," or "Stop, this isn't working." I just had to suffer through it. And I actually found myself at that point able to divorce, my critical mind from it and just be like, okay, I enjoy this movie. This movie's pretty good. This turned out right. Because, when you write and direct something like this, it's in your head from the moment you start the script, like you've seen it.
Yeah.
And there's so many kind of changes along the way. So when you're writing it, you see one movie, but then when you begin pre-production and you see the actual location you're at, it's a different movie. Like that movie in your head has changed. This is not exactly the house you saw. This is not maybe the actors you saw. So then it becomes a different movie in pre-production. And then when you start shooting, it changes again because, things that you prepped for maybe don't work out, or this changed, or maybe this is even better than you thought. And then of course in post, it changes yet again. And the sound design or whatever, and the color becomes something else. And sometimes it goes back to that original thing, which I think I was lucky enough with the Vigil in that by the time we were done with post-production, I felt like, okay, this is back to where I saw it originally when I first sat down to write it, which was nice.
And then how was it that Blumhouse got involved with this film? Because obviously that's a hell of a name to have established and put out there, and it kind of gives you a huge bump, doesn't it, straight away?
Yeah, no, it was, so we'd made the film, and it was right after the premiere at Toronto, at the Toronto International Film Festival. We'd gotten a bunch of interest from distributors and folks at the festival, and then a couple weeks afterwards, I was at Fantastic Fest in Austin, which I try to go to every year, and I got a call that Jason Blum wanted to see me, and so I cut that trip short and flew out to LA and met with Jason. And he was, just to have him being a really big fan of the movie, and not only a big fan, but wanting to acquire the film and distribute it in the United States was huge. I mean, it was both kind of a validation in a way of, well, if this guy respects it, then then there must be something to it, right? Maybe something worked here. But just sitting and talking with them and kind of going over their plans and what excited them about the film and kind of what they want to do with it. Yeah, that was a huge moment. It was definitely one where I remember driving away from it and talking to my manager and kind of thinking, that's crazy that just happened. That I was hanging out in his office talking about our movie and other projects, which, yeah, I would never have expected when we were filming The Vigil. When you're in the heat of it, I'm just trying to make a movie that's good enough to show my family and not be in a total embarrassment. So it was, it was thrilling to kind of rocket right out like that.
At the moment, obviously, the film's not officially out till the end of the month. I think we've got another week and a half or something. But
Yeah.
the early reviews that I've seen from some of the press is very, very high. You've seen a lot of 5 stars and really good words. You're getting all the excellent and perfect horror and all this. Has that been really good for you? Because obviously it must be very nervous sitting there waiting to see what they're actually going to say about you.
Yeah, no, it's definitely nerve wracking, and it's been the COVID
Yeah,
situation of it all now has been interesting because the film has its release. It's first out in New Zealand and then Australia, and then slowly moving through UK and France, Germany, and it'll come out here in the States in the fall in the so it's an interesting seeing it kind of the reaction overseas before anyone gets to see it here is interesting. I've been very happy with kind of the critical response. Again, it's something that I didn't expect. I when we sat down to make this movie, I just really wanted to make a scary movie. I
yeah,
just wanted to make a horror film, and I knew I was going to use tropes of the horror film. In my mind, there have been countless Christian supernatural horror films. I mean, there's 10 or 20 every year
yeah.
in terms of possession movies or devil movies or demon movies. Um, and I wanted to make one that was Jewish with the mythology and the kind of world that didn't feel like an art film in the sense that it felt like a commercial horror film. I just wanted to make a commercial horror film like any other possession of blank, blank, blank movie, but within this world. And so the goal was always, when I sat down with my producers, I said, guys, I want to make sure this isn't a Jewish film. This is a horror movie. It happens to be set here and through this lens, but we're going to have jump scares, and love them or hate them. Jump scares are an integral part of horror film. And I wanted to make sure that we were achieving those goals in terms of, let's have the scares, let's make it up like a horror film, let's do it as a horror film. We'll have all this extra stuff added, because I think it adds to the richness of it. But I've been happy to see kind of the critics seeing the both the horror film nature of it, but also kind of the stuff I was going for additionally in terms of emotional stuff and larger themes.
And you've slightly mentioned it already on today's interview, but obviously coming up we have Firestarter.
Mm.
Can you reveal much about this at the moment, or is it kind of all under wraps? Obviously, I remember sitting there as a kid watching this and being a huge fan of Stephen King,
Right.
and I thought it was an absolute classic. I put it up there with Cujo and all the kind of Pet Sematary sort of films. How is it that this came about, and is it from obviously you working with Bloomhouse that this then got discussed as a future project, or?
Yeah, I mean, it literally happened that day that I first met Jason, and we were talking about the Vigil, and he was very interested in me coming aboard the Blumhouse family and finding a project to work on, and so he threw Firestarter out there, and it happened to be that it's one of my favorites of King's books,
Yeah,
one that I read as a kid and really really loved, and I'd seen the film too. And I think the earlier film holds up quite a bit. Certainly the effects do. A lot
yeah,
of these practical fire effects are very very cool. And so I was very excited. I read the script. The script's by this guy Scott Teems, who wrote the new Halloween Kills.
yeah.
And he's an amazing writer. He's done a number of series. Narcos he was on, and Rectify was a show that he created and wrote. And so the script was great. And right now, I think the script's in a really good place. We're really happy with it. We're hoping to shoot the film this year. It's all comes down to kind of pandemic stuff and figuring out
Yeah,
how to get started. But I think if you're a fan of the book and probably even a fan of the original film, you're gonna find a lot in this new version of Firestarter. I call it like a new adaptation of the book, that I think it'll do a lot of what I try to do with the Vigil. The Vigil, if you want to watch just a scary movie, the Vigil can be just a scary movie. If you want to look for deeper themes and things like that, the Vigil can do that too. For Firestarter, if you want to see somebody's face melted off in graphic detail by a little girl, then you'll get that. If
yeah.
you want kind of deeper themes around a father and a daughter on the run, and struggling to survive in kind of an incredibly intense situation, you're going to have that too. So it's got a lot of meat to it. I'm really excited about it, and like I said, hopefully we'll get it in front of cameras sometime before the end of the year.
With Stephen King being such a prolific writer and his kind of legacy that he's got of his work, do you
Mm.
feel extra pressure when you're handling something of his? Because sometimes I think people get it right. So I wasn't a big fan of the remake of Pet Sematary. I didn't think it was done well. But then you
Mm.
see stuff like, Green Mile or Shawshank, which is done to perfection. Are you under that kind of extra pressure, knowing that it's such a sacred name you're kind of dealing with?
Yeah, no, I mean that pressure is definitely there, and it's kind of twofold in that there's the legacy of just King's work in general, and being true to that, and kind of trying to capture his voice uh, as it comes through the books. I mean, he just has such a distinctive voice and style. Both capturing that and being true to that. At the same time, there's a kind of filmic legacy. I mean, because people have been making movies for King material since the 70s,
Yeah,
and even some of the very first ones like Carrie are amazing. So it's, how do so it's both being cognizant of that and being, saying, oh, I want to make a good King movie, I want to have this deliver. At the same time, you kind of have to step away from it and say, I need to just make my movie. This just has this, here's what I like in what I'm going for in Firestarter, and I want to be true to that. Otherwise, I'll be too distracted
yeah,
by the kingness of it. I will say that Stephen King has read the script. I mean, he saw the Vigil. He read this script, and he was really kind of blown away by what Teams wrote. And he's just as excited for this kind of version of Firestarter. So that gives me comfort, that it's gotten the brand of seal of approval. If King is happy with it, then I think if we do exactly what we wrote, and what's in that script, then it should turn out really good.
it must be amazing to know he's kind of sitting there reading the script, and I must be, I don't know how to get my head around that, just to be
Yeah,
like, wow.
yeah. No, it's a funny. When I had gotten a email, his agent had emailed my agent, and had mentioned that he'd watched The Vigil. It was definitely one of those moments where I was like, wow, Stephen King took the time to sit down and watch my movie. And then respond to it, and
Yeah,
give me his thoughts. That's kind of crazy. Especially when I think back 6 years ago when I was doing clinical research, and
yeah, very different.
none of this, whatever, this seemed unattainable.
Yeah.
It's funny how things can change very, very quickly.
And my final question, which I ask everybody that comes on the podcast, is there's going to be a lot of people that listen to this who are inspired and want to become like yourself, a filmmaker, or make a short or write a script. What advice do you give to those people that are listening? Because it's a hard world to get in. The business is changing every day. There's streaming now for all the big movies. It's not as easy.
Hmm.
But at the same time, to get your kind of work viewed is easy because there's all these channels to get on. But
Sure.
as someone like yourself, what advice do you give to those people that are trying to get a name and get in the business and become the next big thing?
Yeah. I think twofold. I think you have to you have to be committed. You have to take yourself and your work seriously, uh, and you have to be willing to put in the hours. For me to get to the point where I made the Vigil, like I said, it had been 10 years that I'd started writing screenplays, and that's 10 years of working. And maybe this could be just my experience. Maybe I'm slow, but it took me working every night and sometimes days, 7 days a week, 362 days a year for 10 years to get to that point. That I was ready, and when you're ready, the door will open. I think a lot of people try to get in too soon. They kind of, the first script they write, they send out to see if they can get a manager. Your first script's going to suck. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just the truth of the matter. You're going to have to write 10 of them before you even find your own voice and kind of get to where you need to be. A second piece of advice would be that you need to just do it. A lot of people kind of, pick at the edges of something and never actually go for it. If you want to be a filmmaker, you need to make a film. I mean, that's exactly kind of what happened with me, in that I could talk about, I want to make a short film, or I want to make this film. I could write a script, I could storyboard it, I could show you a lookbook and a visual deck of exactly what this will look like. But until you've done it, no one's going to really pay that much attention,
Yeah.
because everyone's got ideas. So, for me making that short film, sure, I used my own money. It wasn't a lot of money, but if you have that opportunity, if you get a chunk of money, then put it kind of where your mouth is and get out there and make something. The one caveat to that is don't rush that either. Before you make your first film, you have all the time in the world to make it right, right? It's once you've gotten on the train that things get tougher. There are deadlines and lots of other voices in the room. So take your time, figure out what that's going to be. And if an opportunity comes, someone gives you $5,000 or whatever it is, do it. Go and make it and show people what you can do rather than just talk about it.
I think that's absolutely amazing advice, to be fair. I
Thanks.
keep looking in the background. I can see like the Twin Peaks box set, and I can see loads of
Yeah.
Arrow
Oh, yeah. You
films,
noticed that one? Yeah.
and I can see some Arrow releases, and I'm just like, I just want to
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about all those
There's
films.
a whole. It goes all the way up there. This arrow.
Yeah,
Go back here, and yeah. I mean, that's this is my wife calls it my brain, but
yeah.
it's these are just all these influences. It's always struck me when I was mostly a novelist. People would always ask about becoming a novelist and how do you write and whatever and get an agent and sell a book. And the thing I always say is you got to read. If you're not reading constantly and devouring stuff, and you're never going to be able to create your own work. So films, yeah, I have to constantly be watching and kind of coming, that's the way that creativity happens, is seeing what other people are doing and figuring it out and kind of working through it. And for me, listening to director commentary was huge. So while I love streaming, I still have a whole kind of physical media thing going on because I need those extras. I need to hear how they did whatever it is they did and where that creativity came from.
Arrow take all my money. Every time I get paid,
Yeah.
I end up buying their special editions, and they'll bring out a steelbook version of one I've already owned already.
Oh, I know.
And their extras are incredible. I watched a film recently, After Midnight, and then
Yes.
the extra was Battery, which was their debut film as the directors, and I'm like, that's just an extra. Like, wow.
Right. Oh, I know, and I love that stuff. And there's a lot of these companies that will do that, especially with what's great now is they'll dig up these kind of either forgotten or frankly even terrible films that you can. I don't remember who said it, but there's a quote out there about bad art and how, I mean, you can learn so much from it. So I love that there are these companies kind of digging through just all these forgotten or abandoned movies, and then they'll not only just put them out on Blu-ray, but then they'll have all these additional like extra films or short films or whatever it is on the back end that, yeah, you can really learn a lot. You can watch somebody's development as a filmmaker by watching their short films and then whatever earlier film it was. I love that stuff. That's the that's the food. That's the food that you live on as a filmmaker, is kind of digging into that stuff, how these things came to be.
So does it excite you that hopefully one day we'll get a special like Scream Factory or someone that does Firestarter, and then you have to provide the commentaries and the
Right.
outtakes
I
and
put Arcane on there.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I've thought about that. That's a lot. It is. It's a lot of fun. It's definitely that almost feels like a huge hurdle because, having all this stuff and watching and listening to it, I definitely, I would feel like I have to deliver, right?
Yeah.
I can read all this stuff and talk about it, but if I have to do my own commentary track, I better deliver. It better be legit because, those are great vehicles for kind of learning and just, getting to know the work that you love so much.
I spent most of my days at college and uni listening to audio commentary from Kevin Smith on every film he did.
Oh,
Needless
his
to
commentaries are amazing. They
yeah,
are really amazing. Even if you don't necessarily like the film,
yeah,
his commentary is worth owning it for.
it's incredible. And then obviously listening to David Fincher and stuff talking Fight Club is like, and then you got Radiohead on there and all this, and it was one of those things where I'd buy the disc and spin it 7 times to listen to every commentary, and it's just mind blowing. It's like people, I hate it now when I buy a Blu-ray or DVD, and it's like extras, trailer, and TV spot. I'm like,
Right.
oh, well, that means
Or there's like a little 5-minute puff piece behind the scenes thing.
I,
No, yeah, you want to see. I can't remember if it's on the Social Network, but one of the Fincher ones, there's a great. It just has all these outtakes, where they've, you know, because he'll do like 40 takes of each scene, and you'll see like 20 of them, these little takes, and it's just somebody walking up to a table. I love that, and you can see Fincher there directing, and you see with his headphones as he's watching and listening and looking at the monitor and figuring stuff out. That's so valuable. How else do you see that? I mean, you know, it's one of those things where if you've never been on a set, you'd have no idea how they function or how it works unless you could see that stuff. And listen to those commentaries and kind of, I mean, it is, the Fight Club commentary is also an amazing one, because that film seems so polished and so kind of perfected. And when you listen to him talk about, well, this was a shitty day and this didn't work, and you hear all that stuff, it's, you know, it's fascinating too, because it's humbling in some ways, but it's also, it's great because it feels like, oh, this is accessible. If he can do that, I can do that. If he figured that out, I can figure that out.
He is human after all.
Believe it or not, I know.
Well, I wish you all the luck with the new release. I think obviously your kind of career is just starting when you think about what's ahead. I hope that this time next year you're back on and we're talking all about Firestarter.
Yeah, that would be great.
But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today, and I just want to thank you for your time. It's been awesome, and I think I could end up talking to you for hours and hours, to be honest.
No, it was a lot of fun, Mark. Talked a lot about a lot of cool stuff that I don't usually get to talk about, so that was fun.
So there it is. There's my interview with me and Keith Thomas. An absolute pleasure to have on the episode, and honestly, a pleasure to interview. It never feels like work when you get a guest like Keith. From the very start to the end of the interview, it never feels like work. We could have talked for 2 or 3 hours, and I really do hope I can get him back on the podcast, maybe closer to the release of Firestarter, to talk more and more about horror. I think he's got an amazing vision, and I can't wait to see what he does with this Stephen King adaptation. Let's be completely honest, Stephen King is iconic. He's an absolute legend and a prolific writer. To do his work justice is no easy task, but I believe Keith can do it better than anyone, and I can't wait to see where he takes us on this journey, hopefully by next year, if there's no further delays with production. I want to say a big thanks to Keith for coming on the podcast, but more importantly, thanks to you guys for tuning in and listening. The world is a crazy place right now, and I really do appreciate the time you all invest in Mark and me. As you know, I've got a website, markandme.com, and on there you can access links to all the Spotify, the iTunes, the Podomatic, all previous episodes, and we're near at the big 100, so there's a lot of episodes to work through if you're new to the podcast. But on there as well, there's my Facebook page, my email address, my Twitter, my Instagram. I'm very active on them all, and I do promise that if you take the time to email me or tweet to me or send me a message, I will reply. I read every single one, and if you fed back about an episode, I'll always forward that on to the guest as well, because they love reading it. So thank you guys for tuning in. It's absolutely manic at the moment, and I'm busier than I've ever been. You're getting more episodes than you've ever got. But to do this, I need support via Patreon, and I have got a page that's open right now. You can access it on markandme.com or via Twitter or Facebook. Every penny that you put into the podcast gets invested back into the podcast. I never pay myself, and as you know, I'm a one-man team. I record, I schedule the interviews, I conduct the interviews, I produce and edit, and then I publish them, and I manage all my social media. I'm a one-man team, so any support goes a long, long way, and I really do appreciate it. But on top of that, you're not just getting the episodes every week by being a Patreon. There's opportunities to win some amazing prizes. And I'll say it now, in September, I've raised the bar higher than ever with the amount of gifts and prizes that most of the guests have donated. And honestly, you need to stay tuned. I'm not building it up to fail. The prizes are completely mind-blowing. I can't wait to share them all. So if you jump onto Patreon, for less than £1 a month, you can sponsor me and endorse me and help me and support me. And it really does make a huge difference to the podcast. Thank you again for listening and taking the time. As it is so busy at the moment, I'm not even going to say I'll speak to you in a week. I'll be back with a brand new podcast in a matter of days, and it's going absolutely insane. I truly believe my best work is about to come out. I've had some incredible guests on telling some incredible stories from all walks of life. You've got, I can't really tease, but we've got some, I don't know what to say, I don't want to ruin it, but I've gone down and interviewed some new people from different areas within pop culture that I've never delved into before, and the payoff has been fantastic, so I can't wait to share all these with you very soon. So as it is, right now I'm going to say bye. I'll speak to you all in a few days' time, and thanks again for listening. Take care.
Like a